in the 12th chapter of the gospel recorded by Luke, the 16th through the 19th verse, and Psalms 23rd and 5, and Malachi 3 and 10. And he spoke a parable unto them, saying, The ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentifully, and he thought within himself, saying, What shall I do, because I have no room where to bestow my fruits? And he said, This will I do, I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there will I bestow all my fruits and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. And in the 23rd Psalms, verse 5, Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. And in Malachi 3 and 10, Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house, and prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven, and pour you out a blessing, that there shall not be room enough to receive it. Now I'd like to talk to you just in a kind of friendly, light-hearted way on the subject, God and your overflow. God and your overflow, or God and the stuff that you don't need. Now, I very seldom or almost never talk to people about my problems. In fact, there are people who believe that I have no problems. But I have intentionally, in my entire life, avoided ever talking to people about any problem that I've ever had. Now, granted, I've had very few of them to begin with, but I have had some problems. But I will not talk to other people about my problems. And the reason that I don't talk to other people about my problems is because when I compare the problems that I would talk to other people about that are mine and the problems that they have, the stuff or the things that I concern myself with are so different and so minor compared to what they're dealing with that they would think I was bragging. So therefore, I do not talk to people about my problem. But because you all are such nice people, and because I trust you, I'm going to tell you today about one of my problems. And you will see why I don't tell other people about this problem. Now, I'm quite serious. You'll find it funny, probably, but I'm quite serious about a problem that I have. And I've had it for a long time, and I thought I'd solve it, then that here's the problem. I have always had more than I needed for myself. Now you see why I don't talk to other people, okay? I have always had more than I needed for myself. And my biggest problem has been, and especially in the last few years, my greatest problem or greatest issue or greatest preoccupation is how do I, as a responsible Christian man, share with others that in a Christian responsible way the things that I have that I don't need. Now that's my problem. Now you say, well, so that's what you take up our time. for this morning. That's why nobody wants to hear you preach. And when I was thinking about this sermon, I thought, now, this is why folks are not interested in your preaching. Because the other preachers are telling folk how to get rich. Other preachers are telling folk about their harvest. God gonna give you a harvest. You plant the seed, give me $40, and God is gonna give you a harvest. And here I am talking to folks about how you give back to others the stuff that you have been given by God. And now you see why folks are not interested in listening to me. Because they want to hear the other side. You know, black children are not interested in listening to me. Because black children want somebody to tell them that they are doing well in school when they are making C's. Oh, I'm doing fine. Say, how are you doing in school? I'm doing fine. So what does that mean? Oh, I'm passing. What does that mean? I'm making C's. And I say, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. So they run from me. So I can understand why it is that folks don't want to be bothered with me. Here it is. Other preachers are telling folks, oh, get your harvest. Get your blessing. Ride around and find cars and do all these great things because God wants you to have all of this stuff. And Reverend Jenkins says to you, look in your closet. And anything that you have that you don't need, you need to find an intelligent way to get rid of that stuff and give it to folks who need it. God in your overflow. Now, in all seriousness, that is the biggest concern that I have at this point in my life. How do I intelligently and with Christian responsibility use the time I have, the money that I have, the knowledge that I have, the contacts that I have, all the stuff that I've accumulated in my life that I don't need? How do I, as a Christian, distribute that to people who need it? Now you say, and when I was thinking about preaching this sermon, I thought, oh, this is going to sound crazy. People won't like the sermon. And then I happened to look down in front of me when I was doing this, and there was a magazine on my desk that I had said I was going to read, and I have to get these Sports Illustrated magazines, and I put them off, and I never read them, and give them away. Well, this one, I decided to glance down at the article, and the article was an article by about Tony Dungy. Now, most of you know who Tony Dungy is. Tony Dungy was the coach of the Colts, and he's won a Super Bowl ring and all of that. And this article was Guidance with a Fatherly Touch. And this article is about Tony Dungy going to visit Michael Vick in prison. And then it says here in this article, people ask me all the time why I retired. And it wasn't from stress or burnout. In my mind, I didn't retire from football as much as I was moving to something else. I wanted to do something to help the next generation of young people realize their potential. As a coach, I was blessed to have developed a bond with many of my players, but I always felt that those who made it to the NFL were, for the most part, men who had gotten some good mentoring along the way. I wanted to reach out to young men who hadn't had the benefit of college in NFL environments. In other words, here's this man who is rich, a millionaire probably, who is popular, known all over the world, who have a good family, who has most of the things that people are struggling to get, particularly younger people. And he says, I retired because I wanted to find a more effective way to give my extra back to the community. So he could have said, I retired because I'm one of those people who believe that I ought to pay attention to Reverend Jenkins when he says, God and your overflow, that you need to try to, as a Christian, give back the stuff that you need more than you have. Now you see why the children's sermon was what it was today. All of us. And you think, oh, well, this is just a problem that he claims he had. Well, everybody has this problem. This is a problem. And in fact, you need to teach children how to deal with their overflow. Do you realize that having more than you need is only a blessing if you have a strategy to deal with the extra? You see, having more than you need is really a curse if you don't know how to deal with the overflow. Did you know that the children, that gifted children, are often more likely to get into trouble at school than normal children, than slow children? Because no one has taught them how to deal with their overflow. They are smarter than the other children, and they don't need as much time as the other children need to understand what the other children understand. So they get it in 15 minutes, and the other kids take 45, so they get it in the first 15 minutes and spend the other 30 minutes playing. I was lecturing in Alabama recently, and there were two little kids who decided they weren't going to listen. They had this reputation of being the bad kids at the school, and they decided they weren't going to listen. Well, if you don't, you don't. So I put them out of the session and told them, people pay me a lot of money to talk, so you either listen or leave. So I put them out and told them to go to the principal's office, and I'll talk to them after my lecture. Well, I went in and talked to them. They were sitting there waiting on me to talk to them. And I talked to them, and they said that they were the smartest two kids at the school, and they actually were. Now, they didn't know the principal had already told me about them before the session. So they said they were so smart. He said he knew more than the teacher. And I said to him, why is it that you use your smartness to be a terror at the school rather than to help the other children who don't know as much as you know? And when I left that school, I called the principal back and said, you watch those two kids, because those are the kind of kids that wind up getting guns and shooting. Those are the kind of kids who feel that they're out of place and that everybody else is so dumb and nobody understands them. Oftentimes, those are the kind of kids who get into trouble. Because now, notice, let me make sure that you understand what I'm saying here about this kid, and that it wasn't quite clear. This is not to say that smart kids are more likely to take up guns and start shooting. But the thing that I discovered about these children, which I should have told you first, is that those kids had no sense of moral responsibility for their intelligence. And those are the kids. They were smart, and they thought that it was okay to use their smartness to make fun of other people rather than to help them. And that's why they were dangerous. Not just that they were smart, but because they had accepted no moral responsibility for their extra gift. And whenever God has given you more than you need, and you don't take any moral responsibility to use that responsibly, it is dangerous. It is dangerous. Now let's look at these scriptures. Here's one scripture where a man he has been blessed. God has given him a great deal. The ground of a certain rich man, says the scripture, brought forth plentifully. And he saw all of this harvest. And he had this extra, this bountiful supply of food. And he had to decide, what do you do with stuff when God gives you more than you need? And he decided that he was going to hoard it, that he was going to stuff it into his own life. You see, there are two things that you can do when God gives you more than you need. One, you can try to stuff it into your own life. And two, you can try to responsibly distribute it more to the people who need it more than you do. The two things. When God gives you more than you need, you can try to stuff the extra into your life, or you can try to distribute it intelligently to the lives of folks who need it. Now, if you try to stuff it into your life, that is usually going to be to your detriment. You know, it's a shame. I decided to stay away from buffet restaurants. And the reason that I started to stay away is because every time I go, I see at least one person who ought to be carried out in handcuffs. Because they cannot handle buffets. I see one with a plate full of chicken wings and they just eat and eat. I went one time and I saw a man, he couldn't zip he couldn't button his pants in the front, and he had suspenders on, and they held him up, and he just looked awful. And there he was with 2 plates of chicken wings going back to his table. And I thought, oh my God. Then I decided something. You know, and I decided I was going to stay away from buffet restaurants. Then I decided I would go, but I had a strategy. Whenever I go to a buffet, I always sit facing the fattest and the most out of shape person there. I face them. And every time I take a fork full of food, I say to myself, just keep on. And that's the way you're going to look. So, but you see, people sometimes treat life. I know y'all, we just have a few more weeks of this. Okay. But sometimes people treat life like a buffet restaurant. They try to stuff everything they can into their lives. Every blessing that they have, every bit of overflow that they have, they try to stuff it into their life. They never think about giving it to anybody else. They'll eat both cakes without even thinking about anybody else. Now, some will sell some of them, but they don't think about anybody else. And the people who do that are people who make themselves sick, trying to just take everything that God allows them to have. And you know, they just get in the habit of consuming everything. It's about me. This is the me generation. Me. Everything is about me. And they can't get along with anybody because it's all about them. Everything is consumption. I want more of this. I want more of that. I want a bigger house, a bigger car. I want more clothes. I want more shoes. It's all about me. And at some point, that does people more harm than good. If you do not have a strategy to deal with your overflow, your blessings become a curse. If you do not have a strategy to deal with your overflow, your blessings become a curse. Even if you have more time than you need. A woman used to say in Mississippi, my first grade principal, Miss Chess, used to say, an idle mind is a devil's workshop. If you have more time than you need to do the things that you need to do, you'll get in trouble with all of that extra time, all of that idleness, all that time to wonder, what can I get into? And people call me, well, I didn't have anything to do. I think I'd come over here. Don't come here. if you have nothing to do. Because I always have, a friend of mine called me. He said, are you busy? I said, don't ask me that. Because I'm always busy. Well, do you have time to talk? Yes, I can take time to talk. But I'm always busy doing something because I have this time. And God gives you time. And if you cannot find anything to do with the time that God gives you, you're going to start getting into trouble. So the Christian ought to get beyond trying to spend all of his money, all of his time, all of his talent on himself. And more of us, not just Reverend Jenkins, more of us need to be looking at a way that we can give back to the community. Give back to the lives of people. Those of us who are retired and have already made our livings and got money coming in from retirement stuff. We ought to be looking for ways. What am I going to do with my time? What am I going to do with this education that I've already used it to make my living? What am I going to do with the rest of it? Am I going to sit in some corner and brag about how much I know and the other people out there can't read? What am I going to do with this extra that God has given me? What am I going to do with the extra money that I have? Am I just going to sit around and leave it to children who are going to spend it on their way back from the cemetery? Oh, I shouldn't tell you all things like this. What am I going to? Well, I got children to leave my money to. Well, if they're going to spend it and waste it, why leave money to folks? And when you may have more than they need, just because you have children, it doesn't mean that you cannot help other children. You, as a Christian, ought to have a strategy to use your extra. I saw something in the news a couple of days ago about these electricians in some state, Iowa, I think it was. They had come out of retirement. Last year they had this flood, and the folks' houses were destroyed, demolished, and some of them were damaged terribly, but even though they were repairable, they could repair them. And these electricians had come out of retirement and gotten together and was going around rewiring these people's houses. They are using their talents, their energies intelligently in the plan of God. What are you doing with your overflow? When God blesses you, are you stuffing it into your lives, yourselves, or are you taking the extra and using it responsibly toward the plan of God? Are you doing anything that is helping other people? Are you being a proper steward of the talent, of the resources that God has given to you? Are you doing that? And if you're not, I have some bad news for you. God is going to one day require you to give an account of what he has left in your charge. You know, when I was growing up, we were people who were not allowed to waste anything. We were not to throw away food. You had to eat all that was on your plate. And if you did eat all that was on your plate, you were told there are children starving in wherever they were starving that year. That's what you were told. And it changed over the years. Sometimes they were starving in Africa. Sometimes they were starving in China. Sometimes they were starving in India. But they were starving somewhere. And you were told when you were throwing away stuff, there are children starving. And you were throwing away food. What was the message there? The message was not just that you should waste. The message not just that you shouldn't stuff yourself. The message was you should also be concerned about the folks who don't have as much as you have. That was part of the message. The message was that one day God is going to come back to you and said, okay, what did you do with the stuff that I gave you that you needed? And you're going to say, well, here it is. I bought this. I needed this suit. I bought this car. I needed transportation. I bought this house. I needed a place to stay. I bought this thing because I needed that. And God is going to say, that's fine. Now he's going to say to you, what did you do with that extra that I gave you? And you're going to say, well, I bought more suits. I bought a bigger house. I bought more shoes. I bought more stuff and stuffed it into my situation. And God is going to have some issues with that. God might say to you, do you know or did you know that I blessed you and I trusted you to be a blessing to others? I thought I was blessing others through you, and I gave you things for other people, and rather than you giving it to them, you kept it. You know, when I was a kid, I saw this movie, this Western movie. And there was this man who hated the other man. And he was in the desert. And this man wanted water. And he crawled up to the sky. And he had a canteen full of water. And the man was lying there starving. And he took the water in front of his face and took the water and poured it into the sand and watched the man starve. Oh, that's a terrible, terrible image. When we take the extra that God has given us, whether it is time, whether it is money, whether it is education, whether it is contacts and reputation, whatever it is that God has given you that is way more than you need, if you squander it, you are taking the water from this starving man and pouring it in the sand. Do you realize how many people are suffering for the time you throw away? How many lonely people are suffering for the time you throw away? How many people are ashamed to go to church because they don't have anything to wear and they would look good in one of those dresses that are hanging in your closet that haven't been touched in 5 years? How many people, now you don't need this sermon, but how many people could fill those benches whose life could be turned around by every sermon I preached to you, but the benches are empty? God may say to you, what have you done with the extra? Sometimes it's the extra that carries us to hell.